all of the rape complaints. Does this mean that he's off the hook, even though he is publicly admitted to having engaged in sexual relations at the workplace with a fellow employee?
Yes, well, first of all, the disciplinary hearing there will be no further continuance of the disciplinary hearing. And that's probably because there's insufficient proof. In circumstances of this nature, you find that it's invariably one person's word against another. And an employer in a disciplinary hearing process has to prove that the employee is probably guilty. And when it's one person's word against another, it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
So in all likelihood, it's the end of the disciplinary hearing process, and there will be no further criminal charges pursued.
Here's a question for you. Is having sex at work a dismissible offence?
Well, certainly. I mean, if you're caught doing so in a public place, if you have a relationship, an inappropriate relationship with a colleague that impacts on the workplace somehow, you know, for example, you may benefit from preferential treatment, you may be unfairly discriminated against if you rebut the advances. So there are many ways in which an inappropriate relationship at work can impact negatively, not only on the individuals and their families, but on the workplace in general.
All right, so having said this, in a case like this, an employer, I should say, can file a grievance against an employee for having publicly admitted to having sex at the workplace?
Well, yes, because it's clearly has reputational damage, and it tends to spawn special treatment. And that can either be special in a positive sense or especially selective and special in a negative sense. So, as I said, you could, if two individuals are having this relationship and the one is invariably more senior than the other, then the junior will get preferential treatment to the disadvantage of others. And then when things go sour, they end up getting unfairly discriminated against.
Yeah. You know, now I suppose now with, the complainant has dropped the case, but would companies still investigate an issue like this?
Probably not. Probably not. That would probably be the end of the story, because it will have been established in all likelihood in the process that there was insufficient proof. And the complainant would have recognized that and come to the conclusion that it was a futile exercise to proceed.
Yeah. Now, what happens if an employee is found to have lied or misled the disciplinary committee?
Well, that in itself would be an act of misconduct, and it would be the subject of its own separate disciplinary hearing. Because, one has to be honest, one has to act with integrity, and the extent to which one doesn't do so, then one is subject to its own disciplinary process yourself for having misled, wasted people's time, perhaps made slanderous allegations which are unfounded, and even put the employer to, or influence the employer to follow a process which ended up being wasteful.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that people are now wanting to sort of get her side of the story as to why the charges were suddenly dropped. Again, it's probably something we'll never get to hear, will we? I mean,
yes, and that's typical of these kinds of cases, because they happen, I think, for obvious reasons, clandestinely. The individuals invariably have a lot to lose. In fact, it's very rare for it to get into the public domain, as has happened in this particular case. So, yeah, we're unlikely to ever hear what has happened, but the probabilities are that there was insufficient proof.
Yeah. Now, in terms of extortion charges, because that's the next step that Zwelinzima Vavi wants to take. He wants to put extortion charges against her. How does something like that work?
Well, again, there's a burden of proof. So that is a criminal offence, and it would have to be proved beyond reasonable doubt that there was extortion on the part of the individual. And we don't know the detail or the extent to which there was extortion, but that won't be an easy case to prove either, because these things, as I say, because of the nature of the relationships, they happen clandestinely. It's very often one-on-one. So again, it becomes difficult to prove one's case when there is only one other person who can testify, and they're denying what's being alleged.
Yeah. Just finally, to end off the interview, I mean, getting back to the original sort of story, having sexual relations at a workplace, we were chatting off air and saying it's quite a murky area within companies, and it's not really a policy. And
yes.
Is it something, perhaps, a lesson to be learned from a case like this, that there should be policies in place?
Probably so. It is a taboo subject. We don't like to discuss these things openly. They have enormous reputational implications for organizations and families and colleagues and the like. In my experience, one doesn't frequently see a policy that addresses this specific issue. And perhaps this turn of events suggests that employers should.
Right, let's leave it there for this morning. Thank you so much for talking to us. Labour relations expert Tony Healy talking to us about the case involving Zwelinzima Vavi. The rape charge has been withdrawn, but I suppose the issue we're talking about is having sexual relations at the workplace. What do you think about it? What are your issues? We'd love to hear from you. Please do write to us. You can SMS us, you can tweet us, and we'll certainly read some of your opinions over the air.